In a quiet hall in the Louvre in Paris stands a finger of black stone taller than you are, carved from top to bottom with the most famous laws ever written, nearly 4,000 years old. Every textbook on earth points to it and says the same thing. This is where law began. But there's a problem with that story, one almost nobody tells you. Because we have dug up thousands of actual court records from Hammurabi's Babylon, real cases, real judgments, real disputes over fields and debts and marriages. And in all of them, not one single judge is known to have ever quoted this stone. Not once. Which forces a very strange question about the most famous legal document in human history. What if it was never really meant to be used as law at all? What if the first great law code was actually the first great work of political spin?
Last time, the world's first empire fell apart, and we ended on a question. If brute force can't hold a realm together, what can? A few centuries later, a king in Babylon tried to answer it. His name was Hammurabi. He inherited Babylon when it was a middling town on the Euphrates, one city-state among many, in the shadow of older powers. And over a 43-year reign, with patient alliances and well-timed betrayals, he turned that town into the capital of Mesopotamia, an empire built the way empires are usually built, with armies. But at the end of his long reign, he reached for a different kind of power, one that would outlast his soldiers by 4,000 years. He had his justice carved into stone. Will Durant treated Hammurabi's code as one of the great monuments of the ancient mind. But monument turns out to be exactly the right word, maybe more than we realized.
Look at the stone itself, because it tells you almost everything. It's basalt, black, over 7 feet tall, and the stone has lived a life of its own. 600 years after it was carved, an invading king looted it from Babylon and hauled it off to Susa, in what is now Iran, where French archaeologists dug it out of the ground in 1901 and carried it to Paris. Stand in front of it today, and your eye goes straight to the top, to a carved scene. A god seated, Shamash, the sun god, the god of justice, handing the symbols of authority to a man standing before him in humble respect. That man is Hammurabi. Right there in that image is the whole message. This law did not come from me. It came from the God of justice himself, and I am merely his servant. Below that scene run nearly 300 laws in dense, beautiful cuneiform. And some of them are the famous ones. An eye for an eye, a tooth for a tooth.
But read them closely and the shine comes off, because this justice has a price list that depends entirely on who you are. Babylon had 3 classes, and the code names them. The awilum, the free noble, the mushkenum, the commoner, and the wardum, the slave. An eye for an eye only applied between equals. If a noble destroyed the eye of another noble, yes, he lost his own eye. But if that same noble destroyed the eye of a commoner, he simply paid a fine in silver. And if he destroyed the eye of a slave, then it wasn't even an injury anymore. It was property damage. He paid the slave's owner half the slave's market price, the way you would compensate a man for laming his ox. The value of your eye, your bone, your life, depended entirely on your rank. So the monument we hold up as the birthplace of equality before the law was, in its own text, spectacularly unequal.
But now back to the real mystery, the one that should genuinely unsettle you. If this was the law of the land, why did the land's own courts ignore it? Because that's what the evidence shows. We have an enormous archive of old Babylonian legal documents, and judges in them decide cases by custom, by precedent, by the king's officials, but they don't cite the famous code. It's as if the most important legal monument in the country simply wasn't on the desk in the courtroom. And there's another clue. The stele is written in a grand, archaic, ceremonial script. Not the everyday handwriting an ordinary Babylonian could read. You don't carve a practical rulebook in a font nobody can read and stand it up like a trophy. And a third clue, we do have later copies of the code. On schoolhouse tablets, where apprentice scribes copied its elegant phrases for 1,000 years after Hammurabi died. They treated it the way we treat a classic. Literature to imitate, not a statute to apply. So here's the leading modern interpretation, and it flips the whole thing. The Code of Hammurabi may not have been a working statute book at all. It may have been a monument, a colossal advertisement in stone, aimed less at judges and more at the gods and at history, broadcasting one message across eternity. Hammurabi was a just king. He carved it near the end of a 43-year reign, exactly when a king starts thinking about how he'll be remembered.
Now, to be fair and honest, this is a debate, not a verdict. Many of the individual laws almost certainly reflect how real disputes were actually settled, so the code isn't pure fiction. But the stone itself gives the game away. The laws don't stand alone. They're wrapped in a long poetic prologue and epilogue, in which Hammurabi lists his glories city by city, names himself the shepherd of his people, and calls down elaborate curses on any future king who dares deface his words. That is not the language of a statute book. That is a legacy speech, addressed to the gods and to eternity. The object itself, the 7-foot pillar, it was built to be seen and admired, far more than to be obeyed. The first famous law code in history might also be the first famous piece of public relations.
And here's the twist that makes Hammurabi brilliant rather than just vain. Because whether he meant it as working law or as propaganda, that stone did something no army ever could. It planted an idea so powerful that we're still living inside it. Look again at the carving on top. The king, the most powerful man in the world, is not shown making the law. He's shown receiving it, standing, smaller, beneath the god of justice. The message is that justice is not whatever the king wants. It stands above him. It comes from something higher, and even he must bow to it. In his own epilogue, Hammurabi says he carved these words so that the strong might not oppress the weak, to give justice to the widow and the orphan. That idea, that there is a law above the ruler, is one of the most important political ideas humans have ever had, and it is the seed of everything from "no one is above the law" to the constitution that governs you right now. Every time a modern court rules against a president or a prime minister, it is exercising the thought first staged on this black stone. Hammurabi may have carved it to make himself look good for eternity. If so, it worked. You're talking about him 4,000 years later. But he also, maybe by accident, gave the human race a thought it has never been able to unthink, that power should have to answer to justice. Whether that thought is a promise or a piece of propaganda, well, humans have been arguing about that in every courtroom since.
Next time on Civilization OS. Hammurabi made Babylon powerful, but over the next 1,000 years, Babylon became something more, the most dazzling, feared, and mythologized city on earth. A city of blue glazed gates and temple towers, of hanging gardens that may or may not have existed, of a king who dragged a whole nation into captivity, and of a name that would become a synonym for both wonder and sin. Next, Babylon, the City of Wonders.